Well, good evening, Brian, and welcome to the Lodge Hope of Karachi number 337 and our lockdown lecture series. This is meeting number 37, Brian, and it's getting very close to Christmas. Our First Minister has today announced that we're getting another little lockdown tightening so we can all be safe and healthy, so we can be with our friends and family at Christmas time. So by my reckoning, it's about 5-6 weeks to when the big man comes to visit us. As ever, Brian, can I remind you of the Grand Lodge of Scotland guidelines, and that I need you to keep your video camera on. If you do have a challenge with your bandwidth, please just drop me a little message and switch it off. And if I can ask you to sign the virtual tile in our Facebook pages, Brian, that would be very much appreciated. As ever, this is being recorded and it will be available on our Lodge Hope of Karachi YouTube channel later on this evening. Well, Brian, it gives me the greatest of pleasure to bring to you this evening another brother from across the pond, Brother Joseph Wages. I'm just going to read out the little blurb that he sent me that describes himself, because for us Scottish Freemasons, a lot of the terminology will be quite different to the Masonry that Joe does across the pond. So he's a 32nd degree Freemason. He's a member of the Blue Friars, member of Piano Lodge, Fata Lodge in the Dallas Valley of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, Southern Jurisdiction. He's a fellow of the Grand College of Rites, a full member of the Texas Lodge of Research, Michigan Lodge of Research, and life member of the Missouri Lodge of Research. And looking at you, Joe, you're like me, rather young to have life membership in an organisation like that, especially when we look around us at some of our more senior members. He's the editor of The Secret School of Wisdom, The Authentic Rituals and Doctrines of the Illuminati. And then it goes into French, Brian, so I'm not even going to try to explain the next part of it, and I'm sure Joe will tell us all about it this evening. And he's currently preparing some forthcoming books. What I will say, Brian, he's not Dan Brown, and what he is about to tell us is actually the truth of everything that happens around the Illuminati. Brother Joe Wages, the floor is yours, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch it and talk more about the Scots Masters ritual itself. Give me just a second to get my screen shared. Share screen, that one, share. And can we see my screen? Is everything good?
It's coming up. It started sharing screen. We've not got any pictures as yet.
Let me know when.
There you go. That's it.
Okay, wonderful. I'm going to pull this to the side and hope for the best. And that did not work. So we'll do that. And one more second. Okay, I'll just make do. All right, so from the beginning, brethren, so what we're going to be talking about this evening is the early Scots Master Ritual witch manuscripts. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do an analysis of the Scots Master rituals used in the 1742 Berlin Lodge L'Union. So to kind of get an idea that this ritual is already in print, so if you'll read in Heredom Volume 26, I did a translation of this thing called the Hammer Manuscript, and it closely aligns later with we found in Brunswick of all places. We found the 1745 copy of the original 1742 Scots Master Ritual. And I'll explain in a second here why that's more in context. But assuming that you've read this text and maybe you come back to this presentation, the question is, in this ritual, you'll find the term ancient or Scottish mastery, but the question really is, what is the ancient mastery? And in this ritual, it's the recovery and use of the ancient or lost word by crusaders under the Sanctum Sanctorum. It's the ineffable name, the Tetragrammaton, or we have the Latin variant there for Jehovah. It all means the same thing. And if we'll think about a lot of the early high degrees, they're all really looking for this same thing as well. But we need to step back for a minute here and talk about the actual history of the Scots Master degree. The earliest traces we can find of the Scots Master Ritual say that it's emanating from the Devil Tavern at Temple Bar. It's lodge number 115, and it's chartered in 1733, and it disappears by 1736. It's erased from the books. Brother Mackey had this to say about it, and he said that for a long time after the revival of Masonry in, what am I doing? 1717, Masonic lodges continued to meet as they had done before that period in taverns. Thus, the Grand Lodge of England was organized, and to use the language of Anderson, the quarterly communications were revived by 4 lodges, whose respective places of meeting were the Crown Ale House, the Apple Tree Tavern, and the Rummer and Grapes Tavern. For many years, the Grand Lodge held its quarterly meetings, sometimes at the Apple Tree, but principally at the Devil Tavern, and kept the Grand Feast Hall of one of the livery companies. And so what they're saying here is that they're not saying that the Scots Master Ritual is coming from the Grand Lodge itself, but it's a hint that it's emanating from that sphere because they're meeting at this Devil Tavern Lodge. And so if we look at Rawlinson's list of lodges here in 1733, I've got it zoomed in on lodge number 115. It's the Devil Tavern. They meet at the Temple Bar, and it's a Scotch Mason's Lodge. That's the first time that we really have concrete evidence that there's something else being worked here. So it's a Scotch Mason's Lodge. We see it again in 1734 in Pine's list of lodges, and we get a little bit more detail. And the Scots Mason's Lodge, number 115, meeting at the Temple Bar at the Devil Tavern, it meets on the 2nd and the 4th Monday. And so what we're seeing is that they're meeting twice a month now in 1734. And if we'll take it forward a little bit further, the next year we see in Pickard's list of lodges, we see the same thing again. We see the Scots Mason's Lodge meeting at the Devil Tavern. Well, in those printed list of lodges, there's a few of them that stick out, and we see 3 Master Masons Lodges and 1 Scots Master Masons Lodge. And the question really is, well, what's the purpose of the 3 Masters Lodges and the 1 Scots Master Lodge in the engraved list? And when you look at it, you actually see that they were not chartered and they were used to confer degrees past entered apprentice and fellowcraft. So what it likely means is that in the Premier Grand Lodge, somewhere around 1725 or thereabouts, the Master Mason's Ritual comes into vogue. But by 1733, when these lodges are chartered, it's not really in great circulation. There's a few other instances where they reference it that, you know, someone won't be worth the expense of obtaining the master's part. And I forget the exact reference, but it's a contemporary remark. And so what it's saying is that even by 1733, the full use of the Master Mason's Ritual wasn't in every lodge. So it's showing you that it's a transitory period where a lot of the craft lodges are not working the Master Mason Ritual. And we see it here because we see in lodges 113, 115, 116, and 117 that they're actually meeting in other places. So they have the regular lodge meeting. So take Lodge 43, for instance, they're meeting at the Strand, but when they're doing their Master Mason's Lodge, they're meeting as lodge number 117. And it doesn't mean that it's an officially sanctioned thing by the Grand Lodge. It's just kind of like a Masonic field guide. So if you're wanting to attend a lodge in London, you've got the pick of the litter. And so it shows you what the sign is of the pub they're meeting at. And then in that 1734 list, it even tells you what days they're meeting. And so that's really what's going on here, is that we're seeing the Master Mason Ritual come into vogue. And also the Scots Mason's Ritual has appeared as early as 1733. And what we see here is that in the 1735 at the Lodge at the Bear in Bath, on October 28th, Lodge of Masters met extraordinary, and the following brothers were admitted Scots Master Masons. So it's still being practiced, and now we can see it in Bath here. So it's now spread by 1735 from London to Bath. Then we see in 1738, and keep in mind the original lodge was raised in 1736, so it's lived on, and now it's been exported to the Irish Lodge in Lisbon. And so this is from the Inquisition of Hugo O'Kelly, and he testified that before the Inquisition that he became a Mason in Ireland about 1734 or 1735, and that there are more classes which they call Excellent Masons and Grand Masons, which are above all others. Well, now it's starting to beg the question, what are these Excellent Masons and Grand Masons? And the short answer is, We don't know. It could be something indicating past master status for possibly the Grand Mason. It could be the sitting master of the lodge of the excellent Masons. We don't know. There's not really any context. We just have a reference to it. Now, in 1740 in London, we see at Old Lodge number 1 on June the 17th, the following members of this lodge this evening were made Scotch Master Masons by Brother Humphreys of the Morning Bush and Aldersgate. Ritual still being practiced by 1740 in London. But when you actually read through that ritual text, I'm looking for this word Templar, and I don't see the word at all. What I see is the word Crusaders, right? So let's dive into the origin of this Templar legend. What we see here is Ramsey's Oration. So this is the 1736 manuscript, and it's later printed in 1737. I won't go through all of these references. It's very exhaustive, but when we look at his, we'll read a couple of them, for instance. So he says, our ancestors, the Crusaders, gathered together from all parts of Christendom in the Holy Land, thus desired to reunite into one soul fraternity the individuals of all nations. Again, too, where they're referring to their ancestors, the Crusaders. And so when you go through Ramsey's Oration, not once does the term Templar appear. But what's really interesting about it, though, is that as we go through these, like take this one for instance, it says the union was made after the example set by the Israelites when they erected the second temple, who, whilst handling the trowel and mortar with one hand and the other the sword and buckler. If we think of the Knights of the East degree, which appears as early as 1748, what we're seeing is this is feeding into it. So this liturgy that Ramsey's putting out is kind of tied and central to the whole Crusader, which becomes the Templar legend. We see more examples of this in his oration itself. But the larger question, though, is did Ramsey invent the Crusader legend, or was he expounding on the legend preserved in the Scotsmaster Ritual? And that's my challenge to you. So I want you to go and read Inheritance 26 from the Hammer Manuscript, and it's almost textually identical to the version that we found in 2018. The Scotsmaster Ritual from Lunyon in Berlin. And so what you see here in the context of this is it talks about their ancestors, the Crusaders, in this Scotsmaster Ritual. And so it could be that Ramsey invented nothing or Ramsey invented everything. We simply don't know. But what we do know, though, is that he's expounding on this Crusader legend, and this Crusader legend precedes his initiation into Freemasonry. So I'm of the opinion that it's not likely that he invented anything, but rather elaborated on an existing legend. Because when you look at the references in the ritual itself, it's a couple of lines. It's nothing. And so clearly this is a evolution along that same line. But now let's look again for more concrete English clues in the 1742 Berlin Lunyon Scotsmaster. So the English clues, the Worshipful and Most Respectable Scottish Union Lodge was founded in Berlin on November 30th, 1742 by brothers Fabry, Romain, Herard, Romery, Roblau, Munster, and Perret. One thing that we see in this minute book, so this minute book actually survived the Second World War and was sent back to Paris of all places. It probably should have gone to Berlin actually, but because it was a French text, the people in Russia packing the things up mistakenly sent it to France. And so it's now in the archives and it's on display in the Grand Orient in Paris. But the clues we see here are actual literal transliterations of the titles for senior warden and junior warden. And so they call it Agnès Surveillant and Jeune Surveillant, which is like literally like senior and junior warden. But if we'll think about French text for all the rituals, they don't use the terms Agnès Surveillant and Jeune Surveillant. They use Premier Surveillant and Second Surveillant, or first and second warden. And we see this copied all throughout continental Masonic rituals, whether they be in German or they be in French. And what it is that when they're first translated, they're done in French, and French is the language of the 18th century, right? Up until the fall of the Bourbons. Really French is the dominant culture and language here. So if you're trying to export an English ritual, French is going to be the language you're going to bring it to the continent on, because educated people and upper level people in society typically have a French education. It may not be an extensive one, but it's some kind of education. They kind of put a little booking on that, though. By 1745, the term premier and second surveillant, they're in all of the French exposures. Well, let's talk about it even further. So Jacopo Fabrice, he's born in Venice in 1689 and dies in Copenhagen in 1761. He's an Italian theater painter. He's born to German parents, and he's a scene painter for Frederick the Great and a theater technician later in Denmark. He's initiated in the Old French Union Lodge in London, which is also the same lodge as John Custos. And so it actually gets really interesting here, because we may be able to identify how this ritual is leaving England and getting to the continent. But let's look further. So we see even further clues here. And I'll just do the English translation. So it says, the brother secretary, in conformity with the customs of the English lodges, will be exempt of all expenses he might incur, and our most worshipful lodge, and will pay nothing. And so what we're seeing here is, in this 1742 minute book, we're seeing now a reference to the lodges of England. So it's saying that this lodge in Berlin is actually a daughter lodge from London, but not yet, not explicitly. And here's where they say it explicitly. So on the minute book page for December 31st, 1743, it says that he then proposed that the law deriving from the Union Lodge of London concerning the balloting of brother Masons should be applied to the other lodges. So basically, the English Mother Lodge, the French Union Lodge, is the Mother Lodge for l'Union of Berlin. They have the same name, and we also know the brother that brought it here, Brother Fabry, like he was initiated, in that lodge and brought it over to Berlin with him when he moved back to Germany. So the French Union Lodge itself is warranted August 17th, 1732, and basically it doesn't disappear until much later on, somewhere, I guess I didn't put it in there, or perhaps I did. I did, 1753. It was under my little icon thing, so I couldn't read it. But it really begs the question, though. So we now know that this lodge is likely the daughter lodge, but what do we know about the actual Scots Master Ritual itself? Like, what can we say about it? Do we have any examples? Unfortunately, we have probably the best example. So one of my partners on the Secret Tool, Reinhard Martner, probably one of the brightest minds in Masonic research. He was in Copenhagen and found this within the microfilm collection. And it's actually the ritual for a 1745 Brunswick lodge. And what's interesting about it is, if you look in the minute books, this lodge isn't supposed to exist. So it may be a bootleg Scotsmaster lodge that never really took off. But what it is a full thing of the ritual, and it has the tracing board also for the ritual, and it's dated roughly about 1745. And what we have here is that this ritual itself is the oldest known form of the ritual and is a German copy of the French parent text. So the minute book is in French, right? But if you're a German lodge, you're now trying to have German daughter lodges. Does it make sense to work in French, or does it make sense to translate it into the native language? And that's what we're seeing here is by 1745, they've translated this ritual into German. And so this is just a rough view of that microfilm. And I've actually got a better view of this tracing board at the end we can go take a look at, but just to give you an idea of what the text looks like. And so the 18th century German is pretty tough to read, but this particular text has all kinds of mark throughs and scratch throughs. It's particularly difficult. So my hat's off to Reinhard for working on that one. We have another example as well, the 1747 Dalla manuscript, which is in The Hague in Copenhagen. In this particular one, we can thank brothers Jan Snook and Klaus Petog for finding and publishing it in 2005 in their Prince Frederick publication. And what it is it's a copy by George Close in the 1750s. Well, it turns out that Brother Leif Grukla found in, I guess it was 2018, he found yet another copy of the same ritual, but it was done by Bugge, which was a Norwegian researcher. So he copied right around the same time as George Close, and in fact, the two individuals knew each other, so it could be that they were copied nearly at the same time. This lodge was about 1752, and it was in Oldenburg, the Lodge of the Golden Deer. And so we've checked in the secret state archives in Germany. The original doesn't exist anywhere, but what it is this Dalla manuscript. It's a transcript of the ritual, but not the full ritual, and it also includes all the statutes and the tracing board. So what we see here, and I know it's kind of washed out, my apologies, but this is the Hague copy of the manuscript. So take a look at that tracing board if we can there. And then we'll look at, this is the Bugge copy, which is nearly the exact same tracing board. So we look at this one, let's go back a slide and have a look at this tracing board. So what we're seeing is that the iconography of this Scotsmaster ritual, it's nailed down, and we see little evolution from about 1742 to 1745, thereabouts. We also have the 1752 Hammer Manuscript that was discovered in Trondheim back in 2008 by Kjell Uverth Lindgren. And it compares closely with the Brunswick text with a few more refinements. And so it's from the same period, but at a later date. And there's actually some more explicit details, and it talks about more lodge instructions inside of there. And it's really nice, because if you compare it to this Brunswick ritual, what we see is that there's actually there's periods of evolution of the text over time. So to give you an example here, this is what the version in the Hammer manuscript looks like. And that cipher that you see in the top left, it's what it's saying is the order of the Scots Masters is what it says in the cipher. We don't have a key for the cipher, but you can actually break it in the text if you plug in the right words. And so the point is that later on, by the 1750s, when this ritual was still circulating, they included some kind of cipher, but it's not in the original text. So there's also about, it's hard to say on this one, but it's from the 1750s, but no later than 1762, the Prussian Scots Master of St. Andrew. And I found this one in Stockholm back in 2018. And I don't know why I have points there, but here we are. So this is the actual Scotsmaster ritual itself that's in Stockholm. And what it is, it's the second generation of text. So the rituals changed somewhere in the 1750s, and it starts evolving and drifting. We also have a 1763 Prussian Scotsmaster of St. Andrew, and it's in The Hague. And Jan Snook and Klaus Bettog discovered this one also in 2005 and printed it in their Prince Frederick publication. And that's what this ritual looks like as well. So what we've done basically is we see these different types. It's not probably the right setting to do this here, but like in an academic setting, to show the different evolutions of this ritual. And it's something that I'm actually in the middle of doing right now. And what we can see is the evolution of the Scotsmaster ritual. If we break it down roughly, we have phase one, and that covers 1733 to 1742. And it's got an English origin, and it's based on the Master Mason ritual itself. Phase two covered roughly 1742 to 43, and it's exported to Berlin, but practiced the exact same as it was in London. Phase three is about 1743 to 45, and we see on November 30th, 1743, they add a ceremony to the ritual, and it's a Knight of St. Andrew ceremony. And all it is they take the brother back to the two columns in Saltire and have him kneel and dub him a Scottish Knight. That's all they added to it, but it brings on a whole tradition of German rituals later. In fact, the Illuminati copied one of them, their Scottish Knight ritual, which was a play off of the one that was in the strict observance, which comes from this German tradition. And so what we're looking at is the origin of that tradition. So phase four covers about 1745 to 47, and it's in its second form, and the Scotsmaster liturgy gets expanded, and the number 4 is harmonized throughout the text. So when we go back in a minute and look at that tracing board, you'll notice there's 3 columns. And if you look at the ritual itself, it very closely follows the English Modern's Master Mason ritual. So go read Masonry Dissected, study that Master Mason ritual and then look at a few other texts too as well. Essex manuscript comes into mind. If you look at that what you see here is that the Scots Master Ritual, it directly comes out of the Master Mason Ritual, and in the early parts of it, they use the number 3, but that number is not harmonized until about 1745 or 47, based on extant ritual texts. Now, phase 5 is going to cover 1747 through the 1750s. We don't have a good picture of what happens for lack of evidence of other texts, right? We've got a few isolated examples. And as time goes on, we can add to this and probably narrow and refine this time period. But from what I can see in the 2 examples that fall in this period, the ritual is largely static. So it's got a standardized form and it's practiced uniformly, for up to 5 years, basically. Final phase, phase 6, though, is from the 1750s to 1763, and the third form of the ritual is developed, and this is where it's styled Écossais de Prusse, or Prussian Écossais. Before it's Berlin Écossais or Berlin Scots Master, depending on how you want to look at it. So the genealogy of the text, and so we've talked about how the ritual develops. Let's put them all back into order here. So we've got type 1, type 2, and type 3 variants. The type 1 manuscripts are 1745 Brunswick manuscript and the 1752 Hammer manuscript. Type 2 is the 1740 Friedrich Dahle manuscript, and the type 3 manuscript is the Prussian Écossais of St. Andrew, and we have 2 different examples of it. And so it could be as late as the 1760s, but even as late as the mid 1750s. We don't know, and there really aren't very good paper clues, so we need more examples. So let's actually break down this Scots Master Ritual. We talked about it being a master's ritual, but how does it work? So if we'll put on our thinking hats for a minute and channel your best French moderns ritual, if you've seen any of it, basically you have both wardens in the West. And interestingly enough, if you look back in Edinburgh Register House, the wardens are in the West, and the wardens always stay in the West in all Masonic rituals, exposures, and manuscripts up until the ancients come around. And in fact, it's them that modify it and move the junior warden to the South. That's something else that I'm working on as well. But in any case, what we're talking about is modern ritual. So this is 1730s when we receive traces of it, and the ancients don't appear till the 1750s. So it's built on the modern's Master Mason ritual. So they open the lodge. Junior warden goes to the door to take the candidate. He's got a cable tow about his neck. In later ritual texts of it, it's not a cable tow, it's a green ribbon. And he's led to the door of the lodge. The junior warden takes him by the grip of the elbow, which is their Scots Master grip, and with his right hand, and vice versa, right? So he's conducting him by the grip through the door. He returns to the candidate, gives 4 knocks on the outside. He's tested with the entrance, signs and grips and words of a Master Mason, and then once he's proved satisfactory, he's allowed to enter. So the prerequisite for being a Scots Master is a Master Mason. So the junior warden makes the candidate take 4 trips around the lodge, starting in the south. Then the junior warden turns the candidate over to the senior warden with 4 knocks. So he gives him 4 raps on the shoulder. Senior warden takes the candidate and conducts him to the east, and he receives the obligation with the drawn sword under his throat. So if you think of the early moderns rituals, they were putting compasses on their breast, and then when they were obligated, they would receive a series of raps on the head of the compass. This one's a bit more severe with a drawn sword up under his throat. So the senior warden then conducts the candidate from the worshipful master in the east. And what would I just say there? I said senior warden takes the candidate to the worshipful master in the east and receives the obligation. He then takes the candidate to the west and places him between the 2 wardens and receives the light. So he's blindfolded up to this point, just like the Master Mason's ritual. Senior warden takes the candidate to the tracing board and makes him take the 4 great steps of Scottish mastery. Well, if you'll consider what were the steps in the Master Mason's ritual that they took across, it's really just 3 steps across the carpet, but what we see here is 4. So it's literally the same series of progressions that he's taking across this board as the Master Mason ritual +1. So it's further evidence that this ritual comes directly out of the English Modern's Master Mason ritual. So the worshipful master then gives the candidate, after he's had the obligation, the 5 points of Scottish mastery, which sounds like our 5 points of fellowship. And in fact, when you read the ritual, they're the same. He also gives him an address. He gives him the history of the Scots Master Ritual, which is where we see that Crusader legend, and then explains the tracing board to him. The worshipful master then takes the candidate to the cross columns on the tracing board, makes him face the east and kneel, and dubs him a Knight of St. Andrew. And so this is the part where they added in 1743 that later the strict observance modifies, the Zenendort Rife modifies, even the rectified Scottish Rite modifies. And this is the origin of this tradition. So actually, it's the Berlin Lodge L'Union that adds this Knight of St. Andrew ceremony. And all it is after he's received all the modes of instruction, they add this one little bit at the end where they conduct him back to the tracing board. He's in the columns and saltire in the middle. He's turned to the east, and then he's dubbed. That's all they add to it. But what's interesting, though, is that it really leads to a whole tradition after it. And after all of this is done, the lodge is closed. So it's not an elaborate ceremony, very utilitarian, real easy to get through. And that's really what we see in a lot of early Masonic ritual is simplicity, because that's the point is to make Masons, but on the other hand, not to be overly burdened with burdensome parts to memorize and so forth. It's simple and it's streamlined. So we've thought for a long time really that the Scots Master Ritual has been missing, but actually it's been hiding in plain sight the whole time. If you look in the ancient accepted Scottish Rite in the 5th degree, our Parfait ritual, it's also the same ritual as this, but from that 1760s later version. And so just kind of focus for a second here. This is the 1745 Brunswick tracing board. This is the 1747 Dala tracing board. I kind of darkened it up a little bit. This is the 1763 Perfect Mason Regalia and the Perfect Mason tracing board. And so what we see is this is a later evolution of that earlier form. But what we also see here, apart from the dual, is it's showing you what was the regalia of a Scots Master. So it's an apron lined in green with a green flap, green ribbon. Now the jewel changes in the different forms, but there's still going to be a jewel for it with a green collar, and you're going to have a green lined apron with a green flap. This is a 1763 version of the Sublime Scots Master of England and Knight of St. Andrew Regalian tracing board. So this is from Dresden. So again, Dresden's one of the lodges that's founded by L'Union, but this is a much later form of it, because what we see on this tracing board, a lot of elements that are same. We see the Brazen Sea, Noah's Ark, the columns and saltire, Tower of Babel, Ark of the Covenant, but we also see some additions. We see some alchemical stuff going on here, and we actually see what the dual for the Knight of St. Andrew ritual was, and it's actually St. Andrew on the cross. But if you'll also notice there, you see that red sash. That might be an important clue as to what's going with it as well. And if we'll think about the what's the Royal Order of Scotland today, perhaps in a future presentation I can give to you guys, you'll see connections to the Royal Order of Heredom themselves. Just to kind of put a little bow on this whole thing. So here's an actual 1760s Scots Master Mason apron from Berlin. So we see the Dresden form, and then we see the Berlin form from the 1760s. So it's a green lined apron with a green flap. And that's what you're going to see in a lot of what we call Scottish degrees. So these early Scottish degrees then, there were probably local variations of this original Scots Master Ritual, but for whatever reason, be it monetary, pecuniary, or just to make something new and interesting, they were kind of riffing on this early form of Scots Master. So let's kind of tie this thing back up and open it up to questions now. So in conclusion, we've established that 1, the Scots Master degree has an English origin and has been conferred since at least 1733. 2, that the ritual was translated from English in London and used in the French Union Lodge. 3, that the French Union Lodge is likely the mother lodge of the Berlin Lodge l'Union. 4, that John Custos and the founder Jacopo Fabrice were both members and Scots Masters in the English Mother Lodge. And that 5, that the Parfait degree is really the descendant of the Scots Master degree. So this whole time we've been thinking the Scots Master Ritual has been missing. It's been hiding in plain sight. And again, just like to wrap it up and say special thanks to Jan Snook, Klaus Pettog, Reinhard Martner, Art de Hoyos, Brent, Alain Bernheim, Pierre Moyer, Daniel Gardner, Oscar Allen, and many other people who contributed to this. So it's not just one person's research, it's many people working together. And that's really the right approach, I think, for Masonic research. And with that, I'll yield back.
Brother Joseph Wages, thank you so much for a very interesting presentation. I could see some of the jocks amongst us getting a wee bit on the edge of their seats, wanting to talk about operative Scottish Masonry and the history coming out of it, and it's not to do with England and how it's spread through England elsewhere. And no doubt those will come out in the questions to you, because I think as a nation we're very proud that we believe that Masonry actually originated here and not in Great Queen Street, as many of the Masonic scholars would like to suggest over the years. But we've got a good few questions for you.
Sure.
So let me just scroll back up. I did see that a few of you put your hands up. I will come back to you after I've read out the moderated questions. So Mike, Sotiris and Kevin, I will come back to you. So please be a wee bit patient with me. So the first question is all about Scotland taking up a larger than normal portion of the news in Germany. So we can come back to you about that. I wonder what that's all. So one of the Brian is he's commenting about a lot of your presentation shows the English viewpoint about inventing Freemasonry in 1717, and questions about the Temple Bar. Are you talking about a Temple Bar in London or in Dublin?
Yeah, so let's go ahead and start there. So I'm not disputing that likely Freemasonry does emanate and originate from Scotland. All I'm talking about is the evolution of this degree. And within the context of this presentation, really it does have an English origin, at least within the context of this Scots Master Mason ritual. Now, whether or not Desaguliers, when he visited St. Mary's in 1723 and took anything back with him, that also is a possibility. I'm just simply presenting on the information, the facts that I have, but I'm definitely open to other ideas and possibilities. So any suggestions the brethren might have, I'm definitely open to them.
Okay. There's another suggestion then for you in terms of the language that you used around senior warden and junior warden. The brother's saying that it's not literally premier and second, that it's equivalent, but not the same. It means first and second.
Right.
The French right use the title premier surveillant and, excuse my friend, deuxième surveillant, i.e. first and second warden.
Yes, and that's what I was saying in the presentation, is that in the bulk of all the rituals that we see, especially in the exposures post 1745, it's premier and second surveillant. However, in this particular text, in the ritual book, the minute book itself from 1742, that they're using like literal translations of junior and senior warden, and it's literally the only example of it that I know. And it was just to bolster the idea that it's likely an English origin and translated literally in English, and it's because there's not a large usage yet in French. Now, I could keep my hat later and find a 1730s French manuscript that says otherwise, but for right now, just based on the evidence I've seen, it looks to be this way.
Okay, thank you. One of our regular contributors tells me that his affiliated mother lodge in Oldenburg, Germany, is the Golden Hirsch.
That's right.
And he says he can put you in touch with Jan Snook and Klaus Bettag, but I'm assuming from what you said later on, you already are in touch with these.
That's right.
Brian. You see, without giving away any of the secrets here, and I think this is a bit of a yes or a no answer. One of our brethren from Greece says that the grip sounds a bit like the installed master's grip.
It could be.
Yeah.
But that's a theory that I have, is that these are practical evolutions, right? And so when we see like the creation of the Master's Ritual or the Scots Master's Ritual, it could be a formalization of an already extant practice, as far as like an installed master or a past master receiving a different thing, and that's all that I think is likely happening here, and that's probably how these early rituals come about, anyways, at least from an English perspective.
Okay. Another question is, would the positions of the master and the two wardens shown in one of the earlier images represent where the three pillars are generally positioned?
And that I think there's something to that too, because if we'll look in like in all the early catechismal questions, and also even in popular usage, like, you know, the sun, moon, and the worshipful master, and they have their correlations to the pillars. So yeah, it's more of the same thing here.
Okay. Stuart, our friend from Germany, lets us know that he worked as director of ceremonies for 3 years using that ritual, or pretty much the same ritual.
Very nice. And so I think really the floor work, like it stays rather static even throughout the whole history. But what likely changes are the words, and you know, there's just refinements and evolutions over time, but the structure of it, I think, is rather consistent throughout time.
Okay. In the walkthrough of the degree, it was said the candidate was taken to the east for his obligation, but there was no mention or indication of an altar in the lodge room. Was there one?
Well, no, it's like in the English usage where you have a pedestal in the east. So, so like an American ritual, like we work with Preston Webb, and we like to put the altar in the middle of the lodge room, probably where it doesn't belong according to everyone else. But that's what we do here. However, in English Masonry, whether it be emulation or even like in the early ancients and modern stuff, the master is going to be in the east, and he's going to have a pedestal in front of him, and so that's where the obligation happens. And if you'll think about the famous French engravings from like 1740s that get copied later in the 1760s, you see the same thing where you see the tracing board on the floor. He's crossed the carpet and he's kneeling at either a table or pedestal in the east with the compasses, and that's what's going on here. So it's again more of the same thing.
Okay. One of our resident experts in the history of the Scottish craft is putting a question to you. The Scottish degrees evolved a lot differently to that, so I think we can agree on that. Can I ask though what you meant by your remark after the revival of Freemasonry in 1717?
Oh, no, that was a reference. Brother Mackey had written that back in the 19th century. And so what he's going off the whole idea that, you know, Freemasonry comes from the Grand Lodge in 1717. They met at the apple tree. And we all know that's a bunch of bunk now. But in the 19th century, they had little else to go on and weren't asking a lot of critical questions, nor were there many scholars looking through this information. And so what he's repeating is that legend there. I'm not even attempting to imply that. I mean, if we look at the oldest Masonic Rituals, Edinburgh Register House from 1696, and there's fragments that go all the way through Hopewood, like up to 1707. And what we see is that same ritual being worked through a number of years. And so there's continuity and standard form there. You know, Scottish Masonry likely is older than English Masonry.
Yeah. Okay. There's another question. Can you comment about the Jacobite links to these high degrees?
So I don't think that it's necessarily like a political thing. I think it's that in Jacobite circles, you start seeing these sorts of things. And if you look and read the legend carefully, where they're talking about the Crusader legend within the Scots Master Ritual itself, like if you were to apply allegory to it, well, it very well could be Bonnie Prince Charlie, but I'm not certain. The thing is, we see the Scots Master Ritual pop up itself, and then by 1741, we see the Royal Order of Herodom. Was the Royal Order of Herodom a play on the Royal Order of the Thistle, you know, that was revived like in the 1690s? We don't know. They seem to use same iconography with St. Andrew on the Saltire, but that's also a symbol for Scotland, so you really can't say with any kind of conclusive evidence. it's likely that they're related, but how they're related, we can't establish yet for lack of evidence. And so anything you say to that is it's speculation at this point.
Okay, another comment from me, and the Scottish lodges did not really adopt the 3-degree system, and that very fragmentary, and it was only with lodges attached to the Grand Lodge of Scotland. One of our brethren from Lebanon, in the side order of the Knight Beneficent of the Holy City, which is the continuation of the rectified Scottish Rite. All these big words for me tonight, Brian. The first degree is the Scots Master of St Andrew, and the second is the Perfect Master of St Andrew. I believe this was also another place where this degree was directed to, maybe Germany, in addition to the 5th degree of the Scottish Rite, Perfect Master. Have you made any comparison of that old degree has also been directed or hidden in this side order?
Yes, and you need to go one system back further. So you've got like the whole Scots Master thing, then you've got Rosa, which comes in like 1750s and 60s. That's when we're starting to see that final form of the Scots Master Ritual. And then the strict observance really, hits the scene. They're capturing lodges by 1764. And what the strict observance does is they have their alternate Scots Master Ritual with their night ceremony on top of it. And what Baron von Hund does is he takes the original rituals themselves, modifies them, and makes his own system. But what's interesting about it is many lodges, actually, when the strict observance dies off later on, they revert back to the earlier lodges. In Frankfurt and Zereinigkeit, for instance, they revert back to the rituals previous to the strict observance with respect to the craft degrees. However, the strict observance themselves fall out roughly by about they go into terminal decline in 1776 when Baron von Hund dies, and by 1782 at the Congress of Wilhelmsbad, which was initiated by Willermoos. What we end up seeing here is that there's really a split here. So we see several different Masonic reforms. We have like the trunk of the tree is the strict observance ritual itself, built on the foundation of the Scots Master system, and it branches out after it dies. So you've got the Illuminati are doing a strict observance reform. You've got the Zinzendorf Rite doing a strict observance reform. You've got the Rectified Scottish Rite, or CBCS. They're doing a strict observance ritual form. And then you have what ends up becoming the Swedish Rite. And all of these things are all linked together, built on this earlier Scots Master Knight of St. Andrew tradition.
Okay. Lodge number 1 in London is called the Old Lodge. I not understand. Michael, can you open your mic and pose your question, please? I'm not reading it correctly.
It's a bit cryptic. No, you mentioned that Lodge number 1 in London was called Old Lodge. I've never heard this name before. Lodge number 1 at the time was Antiquity Lodge.
It could be that, and what it was, I may have used it from, I used a different foreign language source and then translated it wrong, so that's probably the case.
Translated from English wrong.
Well, no, I mean, I was working probably with either a French or a German text, and then when I translated it back, I just did it in my mind, and I said Old Lodge instead of Lodge of Antiquity.
Okay. I'm not really sure when it changed its name. I mean, when it adopted its name, it was originally would have been known by the name of the tavern it met in. Which originally was a Goose and Gridiron, later the King's Arms and Paul's Head, etc. Okay, translation from French. Okay, fine.
All right.
While we're on translation from French, I just wanted to mention that aîné is the French for eldest child in the family.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a strange mixture of senior and junior. It didn't say the opposite isn't youngest child. That's it. So yeah.
Another question, which holy book, if any, was present?
It doesn't describe. I'm guessing it's probably the Bible, but it's not explicit in the text.
There's, again, a comment from Ian. There's a lot of evidence that these degrees, starting with Amrou Ramsey, a Jacobite, and that these started all the other degrees. Would you agree with that?
I think so, and I think Scots Master itself really gets the whole thing started, right? So it's likely the first high degree itself. And what is it they're trying to do? They're trying to recover the lost word. And ultimately what ends up happening is we probably get local variations, or you could even get brethren initiated in somewhere in the United Kingdom, come back to France, and then are creating from here. And so they're doing a lot of the same things, and that it could be how we get rituals like Irish Master, or just any of the early degrees. Like think of the Scottish Rite, like all degrees 4 through probably 13 are likely local variations of Scots Master, or built something along the lines of there, because they're doing the same thing. They're recovering the lost word. A lot of times they're dealing with the ruffians who took out our Grand Master, and that's the general idea here. And it could be that these local variations, it could have a Masonic context, like a deep spiritual thing, but I think more than likely with enterprising Masons, it's like, oh, well, I've got this new ritual for you, and you just have to pay $19.99 to join, and it's something like this. I think what we see is they're probably selling high degrees early on, is what they're doing likely.
Okay. A comment from Peter Taylor. Lodges in Scotland didn't adopt the Master Mason's degree until the mark was introduced, and the mark degree exonerated the fellow crafts who became murderers in the new Master Mason degree.
What year was that?
Peter?
Nope.
We'll come back to you on that one, Joe. We'll get an answer. 18 something off the top of my mind. Dickon Sandbach comments, the Lodge of Antiquity, now number 2 under the United Grand Lodge of England, started out as the Old Lodge of St. Paul's, and he's a member. So
Old Lodge may have been correct.
Yeah, who knows? So we've got 3 questions from the floor. Can I start with Kevin 636? Kevin? No. Mike, have you got a question you'd like to pose?
Yes. My question is, obviously, you're giving this presentation to a group of Scottish Masons, and it's called the Scots Master or Scotch Master degree. And I'm quite interested in your view in terms of why that name arrived in the first place. So was it an esoteric designation? Was there something esoterically significant about Scotch Master or Scots Master, given the fact that the ritual wasn't really doesn't have anything specifically that I'm aware of expressly Scottish in it?
No, it does. It says that the Crusaders, they came from Scotland, is what they're saying in this ritual itself. So it does have a uniquely Scottish connotation. Now, remember what we talked about a minute ago, that you guys are saying that the Grand Lodge of Scotland, formed 1736, didn't formally adopt a Master Mason ritual up until, I guess, the early 19th century. One, was it practiced? I imagine it had to have been practiced locally, if not officially. But 2, really, when we start thinking about it, I've got a theory on it, and this is all like a harebrained conspiracy theory at this point, but could it be that the Premier Grand Lodge, they're trying to exert their influence, right? So we have like the Grand Lodge of Ireland, for all intents and purposes, it's founded 1727, likely as a daughter initially of the Premier Grand Lodge of London. However, they quickly assume autonomy. And the reason I think that is because we see both the only evidence of their foundings in a local publication, which is also repeated in the Post Boy. And if we'll think about the Post Boy, there's lots of exposures there. So one thought that I had was perhaps Desaguliers, when he visits I think it's 1727, he comes up and visits, or is it 23? In any case, he visits St. Mary's, and there's 23?
21.
21, okay. I'm just going off the top of my head here. And it could be that what he's trying to do is get some kind of Grand Lodge of Scotland form here, or that his new Master Mason ritual that he created. And if you'll go back and look at, there's a 1740 Simon and Philip manuscript, and it talks about the lodges under Desaguliers' regulation, but also gives an image of what the lodge room looked like prior to this. That's a totally different talk. In any case, what I'm thinking is that Desaguliers may be trying to get his new Master Mason ritual, transplanted from London to Scotland. And so if you're wanting to have the Scots practice this new ritual, let's just call it the Scots Master Ritual. It's different from this English one. I don't know if it holds any water or not, but there's a specific reason and purpose why this ritual is created, and I don't know that I have a good answer for why. It's just a theory but it, I don't know. Is it a possibility? Maybe.
Thank you. Mike, does that answer your question? Yep.
Yeah, just to add to that, though, that back then, in the period that this ritual appeared, anything with a reference to Scottish, particularly in England, was a political statement. It would have had Jacobite connotations to it. Even someone wearing tartan at that period in England would have had a political connotation to it. It would have, so it's just something to be aware of, that there may be something in that.
Sure, and I think there is too, also because we see the lodge being exported from the French Union Lodge in London, this French-speaking lodge exporting this ritual out. So it could be, a thing between like Whigs and Tories, or I don't even know if we have Whigs at this point in the early 1700s. My English political history is not the sharpest, but in any case, it could be political actionism. We don't know, or it could be Scottish quietism. That's a possibility as well.
No, I was meaning purely Jacobite. But and some of the names that appear in the membership list.
You've frozen on us, Mike.